Now, someone has told me earlier that I have a good voice, one that could be lent to documentaries or something of the such. And for that, I'm going to be making a fake documentary about this battle I had in Total War Warhammer. Not Total War, not Total War Warhammer 2, Total War Warhammer. Okay. This battle is between three forces. Well, two forces, really. The forces of Bretonnia, who are being aided by the army of Kislev, or a army of Kislev, versus the army of Musilon? However you pronounce that. Anyways, they are... the armies of Bretonnia and Kislev are trying to defend the province of Bastonne from the Musilon forces, who have moved into the area. The Musilons are the last of the vampire counts, after the Van Karsteins had been utterly annihilated and their forces taken back. Not other forces, their provinces taken back. Excuse me. Now this battle is simply to hold out and maybe cripple the armies of Musilin. After all, a vampire count leads an army of undead, and if an army of undead loses a battle, every undead in the army will die. Or, not really die, return back. The bodies will return back to whatever peaceful grave they were in. Now, the initial forces starting out to defend Bastonne are only 400 Bretonnians. Meanwhile, the army of Musilin starts out with 1,200 men. Not really men at this point. Undead. The battle started out already, right off the bat, terribly for the armies of man, as the Bretonnians simply threw themselves headlong at the vampire menace. The undead simply outnumbered them too greatly for that to be an effective strategy. And with the poor quality of troops that were being fielded by the Bretonnians, mostly being made up of peasant militia, especially in the opening parts of the engagement, it simply proved to be their downfall. At least for the opening forces. The reinforcements, however, though, reinforcements had come to help them in this matter. Almost 900 Bretonnians had come to defend their lands. Along with that, about an entire army's worth of Kislevites had come to defend their allies and force back the armies of the vampires. As they already done their job, forcing the vampires out of Empire lands, and now they were trying to force them out of Bretonnian lands. Now, the forces of Bretonnia quickly were routed by dire wolves and black knights. Black knights being shock cavalry of the undead, and dire wolves simply being harassing forces. Meanwhile, the mainstay line infantry of the Bretonnians were utterly shattered, leaving one of the great lords of Bretonnia dead on the field. Now, in response to the massive numbers of reinforcements coming to aid the Bretonnians, they sent their Black Knights and several parties of harassers to try to hold back the encroaching reinforcements so they can meet up with their own reinforcements that were coming from the southwest, if the map's correct, whatever. Anyways, they knew they couldn't handle them straight off the bat, so they decided to fall back and regroup with their main line reinforcements. And the harassers mostly were entirely killed in the attempt, along with the Black Knights, who were or once again simply thrown upon the encroaching reinforcements to an attempt to slow them down. The tactics of the forces in here seem to have been at least on the sides of the Bretonnians, with all their leaders gone and no one to really lead them in this fight. They simply threw themselves upon the enemy. Now, onto other news. The Kislevites were getting into ranked formations in an attempt to stop, in an attempt to hold their ground and wait for the enemy to attack them, using the superior range of their artillery to force them to attack. However, the Black Knights sent to hold them back met the experienced general of the Kislevite forces, who simply held his ground and forced the Black Knights to stand in position as forces of Bretonnia engaged them in hand-to-hand combat, which is not a good arrangement for a force made up of purely shock cavalry, especially while several units of bowmen are raining down upon them. On the other flank, however, they tried the same tactic, this time with a group of 3 Kislevite knights, who simply surrounded and murdered them to the last. After seeing the harassing forces and knights massacred, the forces of the Vampire Count retreated to meet up with their reinforcements and re-engage the enemy, hoping to, with superior numbers, overwhelm the Kislevites and Bretonnians that were left. Now, the Kislevites were purely interested in holding the line and forcing the enemy to come to them. However, the Bretonnians wanted to go to the enemy and decided to just head straight forward against the enemy, hoping that the Kislevites would march forth to assist them in battle. The Kislevites, however, were not interested in such foolish gambits as this, and some of the opening moves done in the second half of the engagement, the harassing units of 2 units of dire wolves simply threw themselves upon a unit of peasant spearmen and forced them to rout within seconds of contact. This, however, did end up with one of the units of direwolves taking almost 100% casualties in this attack, thanks to the overwhelming firepower of the peasant bowmen, which independently are not good in combat, but when used in such large quantities, proved to be extremely effective. And also, seemingly to attack and harass the handgunners of the Kislevite forces. A unit of fellbats were sent to attack them. However, with the superior sight given to them by taking the high ground, the handgunners simply shot them out of the sky. And it was around at this time in the battle that the outnumbered forces of the Bretonnians tried to once again attack head-on against the encroaching undead, rather than fall back and form a line with their Kislevite comrades. This ended predictably horribly, with most of the Bretonnian forces being lost in the engagement. And to get a better view of the enemy and to fire upon them with the handgunners, the general of the Kislevites sent his handgunners forth to open fire upon the enemy. However, the enemy was charging too fast for them to safely engage them at range, and this would later cause the general to retreat the handgunners to safer ground and to send forth a unit of great swords to hold the position and allow them to retreat. However, what was left of the Bretonnian forces were quickly routing and running past their Kislevite comrades. Heavy fighting was about to begin on the right flank, especially with one of the vampire lords charging headlong into a unit of great swords, before he was eventually gunned down by several units of handgunners, along with being simply cut down by the enemy general who charged forth in response. To thin the horde of the encroaching undead, the mortars fired upon the rather useless in combat zombies, although the zombies may be useless in combat, but in large enough hordes, they are quite dangerous. In response to the encroaching undead that were coming at them, the Bretonnian knights charged forth, thinking they would simply run down the enemy. This worked for about one of the units, as the other units were then surrounded by zombies, and shock cavalry once again are not good in prolonged melee combat. The right flank was getting sufficiently attacked at this time, although the discipline of the Kislevites held out in the end. However, it was unfortunate that, while definitely effective, the mortars are very inaccurate and would often cause large numbers of casualties among the Kislevite forces when told to fire upon the enemy while in combat. This would show itself on the right flank as the unit of great swords sent forth to hold back the enemy were irreparably damaged by their own artillery. However, the Kislevet knights managed to retreat after the remaining unit of Kislevet knights held their ground against them and managed to hold them back for long enough. This, however, would not stop what had happened to the great swords, who, after sustaining heavy casualties due to their own artillery, simply broke rank and ran. This, however, was good enough, as the units of handgunners sitting atop the hill simply fired down and massacred the encroaching undead. And with the flanks sufficiently secured, the middle of the forces then wheeled around to flank the enemy that had tried to flank them. And with the enemy dying in rather massive numbers, and with two of the enemy generals dead, the necromancer's magic was unbinding before their eyes, causing their undead corpses underneath their liege to simply fall apart in combat, quite literally, as the skeletons, without the magic to hold them together, simply ceased to be, combat effective. The last unit to fall in this combat would be Krell, the mightiest of the forces currently engaged. He would die in melee combat with the general of the Kislevite forces, although his death would most assuredly be the killing blow delivered to them by the handgunners and what was left of the Bretonnian forces. It ended in a decisive victory for the Kislevite forces, and a horrible defeat for the forces of the vampire counts. However, it would be a bittersweet victory for the forces of Bretonnia, who lost massive numbers of their own men in this engagement, although most of those units were peasants, and one would doubt that the feudal lords of Bretonnia would care very much about the death of peasants. And thus ends the defense of Bastonne.